prior to patch, this is as far as I can zoom in, this is what we were at stats-wise. This is all ranks in America. We'll do Asia as well. But obviously, Arissa Roadhog ran in the dumpster, right? No big surprise there. Diva's struggling maybe a little bit more than she should be on paper. If we look at Grandmaster, which, if you guys know, I like to look at all ranks, then I like to look at Grandmaster. Hazard is kind of finally near the bottom there. Zarya is definitely overtuned. We talked about this with the alt-fire perk. Queen is fine. Ball is definitely overtuned as well. But Arissa's interestingly doing very well. I wouldn't anticipate that. That might just be that the players at the high rank know exactly when and where to play her, and that she's not seen as a solution tank like she is in lower ranks. But this I find very interesting, and this is not something that I noticed ahead of time. But yeah, we pivot that over to where we are post-patch. And so this is post mid-season here. And I'll zoom out a tad bit more here because it's a little bit better structured. Oh gosh, my scroll wheel. There we go. And this is where we're at. Post-patch. Pre, post. Pre. Wait, no, this is Grandmaster. Sorry. There you go. Pre and post. Reinhardt's about the same. Queen is about the same. Doomfist about the same. Wrecking Ball definitely noticeably worse. 3% is a significant drop, so losing his armor and so on was a big nerf. Sigma about the same. Zarya a teeny bit worse. Not a statistically significant necessarily at this point. Hazard about the same, which is good to see. Winston about the same. Malga has gone up by a wee bit. Ramatra has also gone up a wee bit. Roadhog is about the same. Arissa has gone down a wee bit more. So really there weren't very many impactful tank changes minus the Diva perk. I guess we should talk about Diva. She's by far the biggest winner of this patch. So Diva, as expected, as predicted, goes up by far the largest portion. The good news, though, is that I think the patch did pretty much exactly what they wanted. So, Wrecking Ball went down, Diva clearly went up, and Malga also, like, a tiny bit up. Hazard didn't go down the toilet. Zarya went down a tiny bit as well. We'll see how Zarya does in Grandmaster. That's going to be the bigger question. But, yeah, this is fine. This is kind of what we expected. Now, if you're an Arissa main, Roadhog main, especially an Arissa main, I'm sure you're still going to be upset. But yeah, this is more along the what we kind of expected things to be. Now, Grandmaster is going to be the key thing here. So we're going to go and pivot this over to Grandmaster here. And we kind of talked about, like, there is a little bit more variance because Grandmaster Champion is still a smaller sample size, but it is enough after an entire week or 4 weeks to have some general ideas. One was that clearly Zarya was overtuned with the perk. Lower ranks were just not exploiting that perk enough. And then additionally, like, the generally tanks are a little bit more even. Like Arissa, for example, is actually doing quite well, which is interesting to me. But yeah, nothing super. And Reinhardt's noticeably worse. Now, then if we pivot that over to Grandmaster now. Okay, so making sure it's correct. Zarya is still really strong. Still very, very, very strong. But Diva has skyrocketed up. 52.3%. 25 damage booster boop. And it's a skyrocketed up. Crazy. Wrecking Ball noticeably worse. Malga also noticeably better. Hazard's actually a little better, but a lot of this has to be meta contextual. But yeah, the Diva buff is by far the most noticeable thing. And interestingly enough, I bet the Diva buff probably explains a little bit why Zarya is still doing well. Because if there's more reasons to play Diva, that means there's going to be on certain maps more reason to play Zarya, even at the higher ranks as well. So, yeah. Isn't the stopping the decay the biggest problem? Yes, the stopping the decay is absolutely the biggest problem. So going from 3 to 2 is not a 33% or 33% reduction. Yeah, because the stopping of the decay was indeed the biggest aspect. So I think it was a reasonable nerf, but it may not be enough. And it's also why Zarya has remained relevant. I mean, these are really high pick rates as well. So, yeah. Winston being this low is pretty tragic as well because the meta is really not that toxic to Winston. See, that's the interesting thing. Zarya metas, Diva metas, Queen to a lesser extent, Sigma, Wrecking Ball. You've got hit scans pretty weak. A lot of anti-dive characters aren't super strong right now. I guess you could talk about like Torb being pretty strong, being difficult, but the rest of the meta isn't really toxic to Winston, with the exception of maybe Ana not being super strong isn't like great. But Winston being this bad in Grandmaster definitely tells you that he's just objectively weaker than the other tanks. Like it isn't a meta thing. He's just not very strong. Now we're talking about Grandmaster here. He's still fine, but yeah. Wasn't Diva's low win rate partly because of Zarya? Partly, yes. Yeah. Reaper pretty good right now? Yeah, but Reaper is not as good versus Winston as like in Grandmaster. It's not amazing. So, but yeah, the Diva buff is clearly significant here. So, interesting. We'll take a quick look at Asia here. And we'll take a quick look. I mean, Winston is going to be that regional diff. This is prior to the patch. Winston and Grandmaster. Well, let's do all tiers real quick. So, hello. Okay. Why is the win rate thing not working? Okay, there we go. Sorry. Queen, Sigma, there's nothing really different in the regional thing. Winston is better, for sure. Ryan is definitely a lot worse regionally as well. And then I guess that's kind of like we look at that right now, and that's going to be probably pretty similar. Winston definitely he's tolerable. He's fine. And Ryan is definitely noticeably worse. So no big surprises there. Diva, again, we're seeing almost a 2% increase in Asia as well. So that's definitely not more of a regional thing. And then again, if we look GM prior to the patch here, Zarya, Winston, very good. It's interesting to see how good Winston is in Asia and Grandmaster. And then this is going to be the real question. Yeah, Winston's a bit worse, which is pretty funny. Yeah. This is the GM Asia win rate as of this past week. Right, 35.1. Yeah, this to me just screams like, gosh, like I feel like, from my experience coaching and working with a lot of Asian players, I just feel like the Asian meta is a lot more volatile. Which sounds weird to say, because we have so much more respect for the professional level of value, like the professional players, like they've clearly been the better players over the history of Overwatch. But like, I'm sorry, but Malga should not have a 41.6 win percentage. It's a very small sample size, so you can't really draw too much from that. But even Ryan being as low, Malga being 45.7 in all ranks in Asia, I'm calling bull. And the reason why that's the case is because I just know how Asia ranked generally works is that people throw games so quickly. And they also counterpick crazy. Why would Wrecking Ball be there? I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea why Wrecking Ball is this slow. Maybe it's just too small of a sample size in Grandmaster. If we look at the larger sample size, he's also not good. That's true. If we look, he got sledgehammered. That seems strange. But I guess if nothing else, you kind of see the difficulty with balancing here when you have a literal 3 or 4% fluctuation or more in Winston's win rate, depending on and the same thing with Reinhardt as well. Heck, even Malga, right? Malga goes from being 45.7. Where is he? To 48.1. Like 2.5% jump. 2.5%. With essentially no buffs or nerfs outside of the Orisa matchup. So, hey Abby, hope you're well, mate. Have a good night, mate. You don't like looking at all tiers? I think you have to, because remember, you have to understand that this has a significant impact on how patches go. Lacking nuance is the exact reason why we should look at all tiers. Because in irony, if you're looking at Grandmaster, you're losing a lot of nuance because it's a very, 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 very small percentage of the player base. All tiers, I know that a lot of, I mean, I've argued this with like Symmetra, Kiriko, and so on. Like, you can't argue exclusively off of all tiers because a lot of characters, love you, are misunderstood in lower and mid ranks, but you can't ignore that. That's like really importantly. Oh, look at all separately, not skip metal ranks. I don't know. I want to look at like what the best players are doing with the sample size that we have, and then what all players are doing, which is essentially like Grandmaster has a very small impact on this because it's like 1-2%, whatever, not even, right? Ball is banned a lot in Grandmaster. I mean, it could be. Yeah, it could be a thing. Looking at all tiers is dumb. I just strongly disagree with that sentiment. Because when you look at silver and gold, you're looking at each one in isolation. I want to see the combination of all of those ranks performance. Like the vast majority of Overwatch players, this is not going to be perfectly accurate for all of them, but it will be relatively close to accurate for all. I don't see how that. If you've ever done any sort of statistical work, you know that this is the case, right? You need to look at the largest sample size that you can possibly have, because this is also the statistics that the developers are going to be using when they're making decisions, right? It's just a lot more reliable. I haven't checked DMs just yet, Bobby, but no, I will check it when I get a chance. Yeah, Plat was the biggest breakdown, the last that we checked, but yeah, we don't know. So when we look at, for example, the Asian win rate for Reinhardt, that doesn't mean it's going to be this at gold or plat or silver, but it's going to be relatively close, right? So if let's just check right now, right? So relatively close, right? Relatively close, right? Relatively close, right? And then, Diamond will start to see the drop, right? It starts to drop pretty significantly around Diamond. Yeah. A totally different game between Gold and Grandmaster? I mean, I just completely disagree with that sentiment. Overwatch is not a different game between ranks. If you talk about certain things being leveraged more, if you go to the extreme example, that this is why I check Grandmaster, because I do agree that there are significant differences with how things are being leveraged. But that's why I look at Grandmaster and then all tiers, right? Which is why things like Zarya do way better, because a lot of the lower ranks aren't utilizing the perk effectively, right? But I don't agree with that statement. It's why Ryan Shield does so well in low ranks and yet falls off later on, right? But yeah. Right, you just need a large sample size to be representative for the majority of players, and then we can look at the outliers at the highest ranked, because what you do is you end up finding at the ceiling what are the things that are being the most exploited. I don't even think it's played differently. Necessarily. It's just certain things are exploited more. Players know how to min-max and squeeze more things out. So, and I think the reason why you look at Grandmaster Champion is because you see things that will potentially eventually be exploited. Let me give you guys an example. I believe Ball has had a good win rate for quite a long time in higher ranks, but it took time for Ball players to kind of figure out the PAP value of retract and so on. And so when you looked at Ball's win rate, if you watched, I think, higher rank performance from Wrecking Ball, you could probably tell that he was going to be overtuned for a while. It just took a while for players in lower ranks and mid ranks to kind of figure it out. I think the same thing applied to Symmetra to a lesser extent. I think if we look at a character like Freya on her release, I think you saw a very similar situation. Wuyong to a lesser extent as well. And so when you look at higher ranks, you're not doing so that you only balance around higher ranks. Although that definitely is something that you probably favor higher ranks slightly more. But I do think that it's kind of like a prediction. When you look at high rank win rates, you see the future, I think is kind of what you see. You see more of a future. I'm looking at Tracer and Warrior pick rate different between Gold and GM. It's easy to make an assumption from that. Look at all ranks as a whole. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. But let's use your example. If you look at Moira pick rates, let's just jump into here, right? So Moira pick rate, okay? When I see Moira pick rate and GM, okay, or just all tiers, okay, 15.6%, and I see that she's underperforming, you do have to look within the context of that and go okay, well, when is Moira being picked? But my point being is that there's not going to be a significant variance between what we see here and what we see in Gold. All right. I mean, look at it, right? It's very, very similar. it's almost the exact same win rate and it is the exact same win rate, and it's a very similar pick rate. So basically, if I wanted to be more granular for the sake of accuracy, I would be, but that's not the purpose of what we're doing here. So if this was my job, then yes, I would be more granular, but that's not what we're doing. We're getting general impressions. But yeah, being more granular is always better if you can afford to do it, if you have the time to do it, of course. And if that's your job, then obviously. But for me, it's like I want an 85% accurate perception for what we're doing, 90%, whatever. So yeah, okay, let's keep going here. There's lots of interesting things that we're going to learn from this. Big thing here, I think, obviously right off the bat, is that there's some disagreement with how strong certain dive characters are. Zarya is still strong. Diva definitely benefited objectively a lot. Malga seems to be doing slightly better, but that is going to be more regional specific. I mean, heck, I'm not even looking at Europe, right? I mean, that's a clear blind spot for me, but I don't want to add 50% more work. So, okay. Let's look at our mid-season damage. This is this is Asia. Okay. Venture OP. Why is this not doing? Okay, there we go. Genji OP, Venture OP, Reaper OP, I guess you could say. Pharahs, they're doing quite well. Tracer's fine. Very solid, very good. I think this is kind of where we start to kind of cross line, where you question Pharah, Tracer, like, are they OP, or is it if they're in the right hands? Symmetra is very strong. Torb is probably OP given his skill floor. I think Ashe is fine. Hanzo, Widow's actually done very well since our 125 Venomine perk change. And then obviously in the bottom there, I'll scroll down even a little bit, like Cass is 45, that's Sojourn 46.5. A lot of range characters really quite bad. Does this justify nerfs when you say OP? Well, that's the real question. So when you look at, you have to have, it's a science used artistically. Okay, so let me ask you guys a question, because you cannot just look at the stats and balance off of that. So let me kind of argue my opinion based off of how I interpret these pre-buff, pre-nerf changes. I think Genji has a high pick rate and his win rate is very high. Then we look at Grandmaster and we see, this is in America, and we see Genji fall off pretty harsh, but he's still okay. He's not bad. So then that kind of brings to the point here that Genji seems to have, even for a character that looks like a relatively complex skill floor, there's a lot of things that are just kind of giving him free value right now. Not free value, but there's a lot of things that are not aging well. And so you go, okay, what's not aging well with a character that we've designed to have a high skill ceiling? You could look at like just his raw damage output versus how consistent that damage is. You could look at how consistent that ultimate is to pop off in lower ranks versus higher ranks. You could look at perks, right? Things like deflect heal. Things like, what else am I trying to think of here? The melee perk. There's like all of his perks, like how consistent are those perks in low ranks and high ranks. You can look at a lot of different things. And you would say that I think Genji probably needs a nerf, yes, but he needs a nerf that doesn't significantly impact his higher rank performance, if possible. Right? So you kind of have to do something along those lines, right? And then we look at Venture. Venture, I think, also overperforming just as much as Genji, even though it's statistically less, because from somebody that coaches and plays the character a lot, I think Venture has a lower skill floor than Genji. The mechanics of Venture, the repositioning aspects of Genji, lower skill ceiling as well. Doesn't mean that Venture is easy, but I definitely think a lower skill ceiling for sure. And then Venture as well is doing about the same. So Venture probably needs a small slap on the wrist, prioritized more towards lower ranks, less towards high, because I don't think you want to trash Venture either. Reaper, 52%. Again, lower skill floor character. Having a medium, okay performing Reaper, it's fine. I also don't think that these have to be static, by the way. These could be in flux. I think variety is fun. You just have to be very cautious. Like, you don't want to put Reaper in the trash can, but you don't want Reaper to be consistently in the top 3 for a long period of time. And he's been in the top 3 for a while now. So if we look at Grandmaster, okay, again, Reaper, middling. So we need something that doesn't affect his high rank performance too much, but something that affects his lower rank performance a little bit more. Whether that's his consistency of damage. Again, we can look at perks and so on, right? Farah is an interesting one, 51.8. Definitely feels like that's pretty strong, but you look at Farah and how she plays now, and she is a little bit more complicated to play than she used to be. However, she's also, quote unquote, overperforming in higher rank as well, despite the relatively small sample size. So a small nerf for Farah and maybe something on high rank or low rank could be good, because we don't necessarily need to be too careful with the Farah nerf in terms of which nerf we do, because she's even performing higher. She's performing even more strong in higher ranks, right? So you can be a little bit more, well, you don't want to nerf something that makes her feel unfun, but you can do something along those lines. And we keep going. Tracer, 51.8, and then you go to GM, and she's 54.1. Now, that's too much. So we need to be very careful about how we nerf Tracer, but it definitely needs to affect her higher rank performance. So it's the opposite of Genji. Something is not being leveraged in lower ranks that is absolutely being leveraged in higher ranks. And can you guess what that is? It's probably her perks, minor, major. It's the use of her blinks, right? Saying 52% winner isn't really a smart way to think, though. Why? You see, you're thinking objectively. You're thinking in terms of X's and O's. When it eclipses 52%, it means nerf. That's the wrong way to look at statistics. That is a really dangerous thing to look at. You have to look at statistics within context. The context of Reaper is a lower skill floor character, and then therefore we need to consider that in mind. In his current state, he's a lower skill floor character. He's definitely, now if this was old Overwatch 1 Reaper, I would say 50% is probably too high for Reaper. But now that his skill floor is increased and he's got more off, then 52% is probably a little bit too high. But see, this is the thing. When you're asking how do you interpret statistics, you can't interpret statistics with more statistics. You have to actually know, play, coach, educate. This is why bias is so dangerous, right? Because 52% for somebody that has coached and played. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm immune from bias by any means, but this is why that I think my perspective has been a little bit more unique, because I have played and coached all of these characters dozens, if not hundreds of times. You know, so you can't go, oh, they've eclipsed this or they're below this, therefore they need buffs. You got to think really carefully. Like I look at Mei right now, and even though she's 47.6, I think that she's definitely underperforming. I also don't think that she's particularly easy to play if you play her correctly. But I do think if she were to get significant buffs in the wrong way, even if she were to go to like 50%, she'd be really annoying, because a lot of ranked players haven't quite figured out how to play her yet. And so if you buffed her in the wrong ways, she would overperform in all the wrong ways. You got to be smart with this. You got to be really, really, really smart with this. This site is Owtic, OWTIC, OWTICS.GG. So I look at Symmetra and I'm like, okay, this character's, I don't think they have the lowest skill floor, but probably overperforming a little bit. But let's look at Grandmaster first. And we go, oh my gosh, she's the highest win rate. So we definitely need a nerf to Symmetra. Even though she's not being picked that much, she just seems to be overperforming for the skill floor that she has. And she's definitely performing in the higher ranks as well. So we definitely need a nerf that's going to affect her higher rank performance. Okay, so then what is something that the higher rank players are leveraging with Symmetra that the lower rank players aren't as much? And it's probably to do with the angling. It's definitely to do with that major perk with the sustain. Maybe it's the TP HP, right? But see, you have to, see, this is why balancing is hard. Because you can't just look at numbers. You have to go play the game. You have to go watch streamers. You got to watch these Grandmasters players. You got to coach the game. You got to involve, because you have to know why Symmetra is overperforming in higher ranks and not as much in lower ranks. You also have to know why would Spylo think that Symmetra has a relatively low skill floor. Now, I don't think that she's a low skill floor character. I think she's more complicated than people think. And then how can we, you know what I'm saying? So you have to, it takes work. It takes research. You have to look at other players play and watch VODs and think about how it's being utilized and what's changed with how Symmetra is played. Why is she overperforming now? Like, why all of a sudden, like out of nowhere? Like, you know what I'm saying? It takes, I don't think Blizzard bases their decisions only on the data. No. But I guess my point here is that, like, even some folks in my Twitch and YouTube chat are like trying to read things only off of data. And that's exactly the same criticism that people have for Blizzard. And you guys are making the same mistake. You kind of see what I'm saying? I'm not being critical. It's a very easy trap to fall into. And I know I fall into it myself too. So, you know, food for thought. That's all I'm saying. Torb, not very good in high ranks, but he's actually pretty decent in low ranks. Why? Is Torb overperforming? Given his quote-unquote skill floor right now. It's 51.5, too high for Torb. So I look at this here, and I'm going to kind of speed run the rest of this here. And I'm like looking at hit scan. I'm like, I definitely think hit scan is probably underperforming. It does slightly better in high ranks, but honestly, it doesn't do much better in high ranks, right? So we can look at it. You guys don't even have to take my word for it. We can look at it right here. Grandmaster, cast Sojourn, Freya in the toilet. We look at it here. Cast Sojourn still in the toilet. Now Freya does much better. Where is Freya? No, she doesn't do much better, but she's better in certain regions. I know if we look at Asia, for example, you're going to see Freya do middling, right? Middling. But again, there's got to be context here. Because do you guys know what Freya's win rate was in Asia when she was strong? It was like a solid 3% higher than it was in America, right? A lot of it is due to... Now, here's another question, chat. Why would Freya's win rate be higher in Asia? Are all the Freya players in Asia just better mechanically? If so, why aren't they better mechanically on characters like Widowmaker? Monkey, right. Freya freaking dunks on Monkey. And we already know that Monkey pick rates in Asia are very high. So Freya all of a sudden has much better matchups versus the meta tanks in the region that she's being played. Yeah, a 55.3% win rate in Tracer in Asia. Ridiculous. Definitely needs a nerf. Even for the skill ceiling of the character. It basically makes her a must-pick character. Right. So yeah, I mean, I think, Tracer definitely needed a nerf that affected her higher rank win rate percentage. I think Symmetra needed the same. I think you could argue that Farah needed something similar. Venture needs a slap on the wrist. I think Genji definitely needed a slap on the wrist that would not affect his high rank performance. Because if you look at even in Asia, right, Genji, very, very strong. Come on now. Symmetra, Genji, very strong. Venture's crazy strong in lower ranks in Asia. And so, yeah. So you got to think, man. You got to think. It takes effort and nuance. You'd have to take the science and use the science. You can't just be like have a checklist of if they're lower than this, they're bad. Like if you look at the lowest, like Junkrat's 46.5. Okay, that's not good, right? But you got to be very careful about how you buff Junkrat. Simply because a lot of his skill floor is lower. He definitely has a decent skill ceiling, but his skill floor is lower. So if you make it too much value, then you got a problem. I mean, he's not even his win rate's not even that terrible in Grandmaster, right? You got to think. So all that being said, let's go to our all tiers DPS here really quick. And we know that we got to nerf the Genji, which I've heard less negative things about it, but I don't know if it's, so I imagine he's going to do a bit worse. But we hope it doesn't affect his Grandmaster win rate too much. Venture needed a slap in the wrist, did not get the slap in the wrist. Reaper probably needed a slap in the wrist, did not get a slap in the wrist. Pharah's probably fine. Tracer definitely needed a slap in the wrist, but she needed a slap in the wrist that affected her higher rank play more so. And probably not necessarily, maybe two slaps on the wrist. You get what I'm saying? Which we've talked about perks and so on. And the reason why I blame perks is because as somebody that's coached and played the game and reviewed the game, I know that her perk sets are unbelievably strong. And they're also something that higher ranks are very good at leveraging. Same thing goes for Symmetra. Didn't get touched. Torb didn't get touched. Ashe got a freaking buff. Now, I actually don't think that's a mistake necessarily because she wasn't necessarily overperforming, because I know that Ashe has a pretty high skill floor and she's one of the more enjoyable characters to be at the meta. And I also think that she's not really had her time to shine in Overwatch 2. So I don't have a problem with an Ashe buff necessarily, even though she's quote-unquote overperforming. I just want us to be very careful with what we do. And I think that they made the wrong buff because it's the buff that makes her less interesting to play into by encouraging her to take less risk by increasing her fall-off range, which I think it was the wrong nerf. But it's a wrong nerf not because of her statistical performance, but because if we want Ashe to have her time in the sun, we want to continue to encourage her to take risks. You understand what I'm saying? That's what I want to see. Because if you look prior to this patch, now this is America, Ash was doing very well in Grandmaster. If you go to Asia, fine. This is prior to the patch, by the way. Prior to the patch. So I think they need to be very careful if they want to give Ash her time to shine to make certain that's not too much, right? And I don't think that 40 to 60 necessarily was a massive buff. I just disagreed with what the buff was, if that makes sense. So, and I think the same argument applies to Cassie. Cassie needed a buff, guys. Like, Cassie and Sojourn needed a buff. I think it's, these guys aren't Bastion, Junkrat, whatever. Like, they're I know Hits game is not popular, but 45 point, that's a little excessive, right? But you got to be very careful what we buff. We've talked about it at length. I won't repeat myself here, but I think they missed the mark with Hinder. I think Hinder is like the last thing that you'd want to buff with Cassidy. Right, exactly, Feidman. Because the other thing about Hinder too is I don't know if I'm right, but I would be surprised if Cassidy win rate goes up too significantly off that Hinder buff. So I don't think we'll see like a 2% increase. I think it's going to be very small, and he's going to be just as bad, and it's going to be just as annoying. So let's find out. Let's go to all tiers. America, we'll start with that. Let's give ourselves some context here. Yep. Yeah, I mean, Genji drops pretty significantly, but he's not in the dumpster. So all we need to do is look at Grandmaster. I think this is a fair win rate for Genji right now. Symmetra drops down a little bit. Or no, actually, Symmetra's about the same. I'm dumb. I'm looking. Venture is, as predicted, the same, basically. Ash has gone up significantly, but not an unbelievable amount, just 2%, which is a lot, but yeah. Sim's same, Pharah's about the same, Genji's dropped, Torb's the same. Echo's gone up by a bit, which is good, 1.5. I actually really like what they did with Echo buff. So Echo buff was, I think, a perfect buff. So huge shout out to the developers for the Echo buff. I don't know how many of you guys have played with it. I only played one game with it, but I just reading the patch notes, I was like, ooh, that's nice. That's a good buff for Echo for sure. That's definitely a weak point for her. It's something that I feel like that she should have. And it definitely had a bit of an impact, right? Junkrat's gone up a little bit, which is kind of funny. Maybe just more of a meta thing, so we'll have to kind of keep an eye on that one. And Tracer's in the toilet. Tracer's gone down 4% in all ranks. And this is what I talked about, man. You cannot do this. You got to be so careful. And as predicted, Cassie's gone up by 0.4% buff to Cassidy. And Sojourn has gone up by, less than 1% as well. Greed is thinking of the sub. But yeah. And again, Tracer definitely needed a nerf that affected her high rank performance. I think 54 or 55% win rate is kind of absurd, at least for as long. And she's been consistently that good, right? For quite a long time. Even a character, I think Tracer is by far the most honest character to have in the high rank meta because it affects low rank meta so little. But I don't think that having variety in meta is bad at all. Yeah, nerf her. Sure, go for it. But it was such a bad nerf. Not just in terms of how harsh of a nerf it was, which, but it just even the RNG aspect of it, right? And it didn't address necessarily what makes her really strong in higher ranks completely. So, disaster, right? So I think the Tracer nerf completely missed the mark. I think the Ashe buff was not the correct buff. And I think that there were some opportunities here to take a little look at Venture, take a little look at Reaper, maybe a little bit at Symmetra as well. And it was not taken. That opportunity was not taken. And I also think the Cassidy buff was not only the wrong buff, but he's still just almost as trash as he was before. Let's look at Grandmaster real fast here. So we already kind of had an idea here. Grandmaster, this is America again. Ashe has a 56% win rate. Too much, right? It's not only the wrong one, but too much. Symmetra's still dominating. She still has a relatively low pick rate, so this is probably more in flux, but it's consistent with what we knew to be the case last season and the season before that. Echo skyrocketed up, so we'll keep an eye on that one. Maybe it's too much for higher ranks. Maybe that movement buff or something else needs to change. Venture, ridiculously strong. Soldier out of nowhere, right? Maybe the competition's worse. But Tracer goes from 54.1 to 50. 4% drop again. Now you could argue that 50% is not a bad win rate for Tracer and GM, and I would say, yeah, I mean, Sure. I mean, yeah, okay. I mean, she's not great in GM for a season. Is that the end of the world? Yeah, I don't think so. So the problem with the Tracer nerf is that this is like not terrible for Tracer and Grandmaster. Maybe it's still a little low, but okay, it's not terrible. The problem is that it's 3% higher or 3% lower and lower in all tiers, right? Like that is too big of a gap for even a high skill ceiling character. Or no, sorry, that's not true. 2.2%. I'm sorry, not 3%. Now, I had an argument or a discussion, let's say, with somebody on Twitter who was like, don't you want higher skill ceiling characters to be harder to play for low and mid ranks? Isn't that the point of the character? It's a good point, but it's importantly missing context. Because if we go back to here, and we look at Tracer here, okay? So this is all tiers, America, there. Tracer is not even in the top 3. So she's in the top 5. That's decent. But let me ask you guys another question. Why do you think Tracer is 5th as a high skill ceiling character? What's the context of our DPS meta right now? Look at the big picture right now. What's the elephant in the room with the state of DPS, especially prior to this midseason patch? Look at the bottom. What's the state of Sojourn? What's the state of Cassidy? What's the state of Freya? Look at these pick rates. A lot of competition for Tracer within her own category are characters that are obscenely bad right now. Obscenely bad. This is the weakest that Hitscan has been in over 2 years. So anything within the role is competition. So Hitscan, bronze, silver, gold, plat, is bad. And so every character, and this is why you have to be careful with what you do with Genji and so on, because within context, Genji is a wildly OP, but it also helps that these guys are bad. So if you were to do normal, like this is objectively, this is not subjectively, because this is, if we look at Cassidy's kit right now, losing 25 HP, Sojourn losing 25 HP is probably the most important nerf that they have received in a long time. So that's going to naturally boost literally everybody that isn't a hit scan. Everybody's going to get their that's why Ashe has been all of a sudden actually decent. That plus the minor perk, right? So within context, a higher skill ceiling character being 5th place, or heck, Genji, right? 1st place. Seems pretty bad, right? I definitely talked about Genji, I agree. But it's not as bad as you may think, because if Hitscan was slightly stronger, you would see Tracer probably drop proportionately, a little bit. But even if, let's roll that argument. Like, let's say that Tracer somehow holds on to a 5th or 6th place in, I don't know, gold. Let's go to gold, okay? Gold. And Tracer's still in her 5th place. Man, how is that possible? This is a high skill ceiling character. Okay, let me ask you guys a question. What are some factors that have impacted characters' win rates that took nuance to interpret? Do you guys remember when we talked about Orissa's win rate? Why is Orissa's win rate so low? Do you remember that? Remember that discussion? Let's go to all tiers. What was an important factor to consider there? When Orissa's win rate is tanked, why is it? Why is Orissa's win rate unfairly low as a rule? Hero perception? Band-aid mentality? Yeah, exactly. So what Orisa is perceived in a couple of characters, Royam, Malga to a lesser extent as well, they're seen as solution characters when a game is going badly. So people often tank these characters' win rates by at least a few percentage points because of when they are picked in the match. When the match is already basically going downhill, they're chosen as solution characters. They are not solution characters. And so then therefore you basically guarantee that the match is going to be a loss. They're also commonly swapped to by people that don't actually even play the character well. If I'm coaching an Orisa main, this character's win rate probably looks more like a 47% on average or something along those lines. I mean, this is, again, contextually needed, right? So you see them as a little bit like Kiriko as well, where you swap to them. Bastion is a very common Band-Aid character as well. And you can look at statistics on this of like, when does the character one trick for the match, or when is this character swapped to, right? Moira's another very common one too. Yeah. So you have these swaps being seen as solutions, and so this makes Orisa seem worse than she actually is. And that's actually why they leave some of these tanks in the lower tiers. It's not just because they don't deserve to have higher win rates, although I do think that that's partly true, but it's also because the win rates aren't actually that bad if you just play the character. You stop just swapping around like an idiot. But the reality is, if the higher up that you go in the win rates, the less and less that you're likely to see these characters. I mean, how many times have you guys heard your teammates go, oh man, can we get a Wrecking Ball? Can we get a Reinhardt? I mean, we hear Reinhardt occasionally maybe, but can we get a Queen going here? Can we get a Doomfist going here? Never happens. The 99% of the player base never happens. Get a Doomfist going here. Can you please swap Doomfist? No, freaking, can we get an Orisa? Maybe can we get a Zarya, right? Which I actually am convinced that's why Zarya has a slightly lower win rate, even though she seems really strong in lower ranks. It's not just due to the perk. I also think that she is sometimes seen as a solution character. Doesn't happen. So does that mean that these win rates of these characters are inflated? Yes. Because simply picking a character and sticking with a character is going to inflate the character's win rate. It doesn't mean that's always the right play, but more often than not, players, especially in low and mid ranks, are vulnerable to trying to solve the problem by a hero swap rather than just an execution change. So I'm not saying that swapping is always bad. It just, swapping intelligently is very hard. And so this is why we see that. Now, I want you to take that mindset into Tracer here. How many times have you seen, guys, can we get a Tracer going? How many times have you heard that or seen that? Widowmaker versus a Widow occasionally, way back in the day, maybe, ever? I mean, I cannot think of the last time I've heard of it. During Widow metas, like I said, it is a thing occasionally. Like, can we go like dive? Like, you'd see that with tanks as well, but it almost never happens. At least not in most ranks. So that is going to boost her win rate. And any character where you can say that's the case, Pharah, Venture, Genji, even Ashe, right? That is going to boost their win rates because they're almost never swapped to. They're swapped from. Sometimes. Now, that's ironically what concerns me as much about the Reaper win rate, because I do think Reaper is more often a solution character, and even to a lesser extent Torbjorn and so on. Because Reaper is often seen as a bit of a solution character, and despite that, he seems to be doing just fine. So that's kind of like a little why I'm a little bit concerned. I'm like, wow, he's a solution character doing quite well, Could we get a hit scan? True. Yeah, that does happen too. Yeah. So that's my argument here. It lacks the nuance of, first off, how weak Tracer's competition is objectively right now, how often she is swapped away from, which is aka very rarely, which boosts her win rate by a little bit. But you guys ready for the third point here? And this one's going to be by far the most subjective. I don't really know, personal experience bias coming in here. So in my experience, the people that play Tracer and Genji play a lot of Tracer Genji. And so I don't really have the answer here, so I'll mostly kind of phrase it as a question. In a meta where Tracer is overtuned and Junkrat or, Bastion is undertuned, you're to take a new player to the game and give them 50 hours of playing the character. How high of a rank did they climb with 50 hours brand new on Tracer versus 50 hours in Bastion? Go. Now, I'm not saying that, framing that like as if the question is obvious. Oh, obviously, Bastion, you just climb right up to Plat. It's easy, right? I actually think the answer is a little tricky. But it is hard because most people that play Tracer, and I should know, I've coached more Tracer than I like to admit, generally really do apply themselves. Now, I know the argument there is that, well, isn't somebody who gets coaching more likely to apply themselves anyway? And the answer is no. No. Tracer players by far are the most studious and consistent and dedicated to their craft out of basically any main that I've ever coached. And trust me, I have the sample size on that one. They grind, they warm up, they VOD review, They're obsessed with, they joke about how they watched every single one of my VOD review. Again, I do know that this is very subject to my own bias and it is not a large enough sample size, but I'm saying my opinion, the question I'm raising here is that Tracer players work their butts off because they want the challenge and they know it's going to be hard. And so the concept that, a low skill or a high skill ceiling character is not supposed to perform relatively well. Well, the question is what do you mean perform well? What if they're working harder than you? Right? You know? I don't know. So my point kind of being here is that it is a very difficult question to answer, and so you just have to look at it within a vacuum. My gut says, all that being said, I still think a Tracer nerf is reasonable. I really do. I think a Tracer nerf that affects especially higher ranks is going to affect lower ranks, and we're going to see her drop to 50.4, 51.8, or 51.2 or whatever. Sure, fine with me. Works for me. Yeah, I agree. I still think she's overperforming. Yeah, not a problem with me. But I think the reason why I think this was definitely an overblown thing is you just look at her pick rate, right? At over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Ninth. And there's a reason, because it's not a character that you can just pick and get value out of. And I think that is the one myth that I keep hearing a lot of. And I'm defending Tracer, but I'm kind of defending a lot of other characters. I'm defending Lucio here. Lucio, if you look at a lot of his win rates, definitely feels like he's overperforming. But like there are certain characters that deserve a little bit of plot armor right now. And if we can bring up characters to that level, I had a really interesting discussion with Questron about this, because Questron is a Tracer hater, right? Makes sense, right? A lot of streamers that aren't DPS players or tank players are, because she's just been she's been overtuned to the high rank for a long time, right? And she just has the value. When you're good at Tracer, you can do so much with her, and the same can't be said for every character. The problem with that means is a lot of the content creators are going to be biased against Tracer as a result. Understandable. Totally get it. Questron's argument was that my concern of that Tracer trickle down is healthy. Well, what about the highest rank, where that trickle down means that there's a freaking ocean of Tracer players in Grandmaster and nothing else is viable? Is that not dull? Yeah, that's a great point. Especially because you can argue against content creators that you want, but their meta perception does make for good content. And if a meta is really toxic at the highest ranks, that generally is going to shave the impression of the game. It's going to push it in the wrong direction. So I do think that matters absolutely. I think that's why the Grandmaster champion player's opinion matters more. Not necessarily because their opinions are always better, although I do think it's usually true. It's actually because their perception influences the player base. That's the spicy take, right? I want Flats and Questron and Super and all the big streamers, guys, to be happy with the state of the game relatively, because if they're happy, there are millions of people that are going to mirror that opinion. It's going to let that influence their opinion of the game, and so that's just how it is. Now, I'm not saying that should be always true, but that is an aspect that you do have to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Now, my point with Questron, my disagreement with Questron, is that I said I would like to see more characters be moved to Tracer's state as a kit design, where they're not immediately easy to get value out of, but they have the value ceiling if you can apply yourself to it. And to be fair to the design team, I think they've done that several times in Overwatch 2. Brigitte, they've done that to a lesser extent with Pharah. To a lesser extent with Symmetra, to a lesser extent with Bastion. I mean, those characters still have work to do, but they're just objectively in healthier states than they ever have been. Heck, even Reaper, right? And so they have, even like little bits matter. You don't have to rework them completely, just bump them up. And so I think they've done a great job with that. And I just like to see them keep doing that job. Keep doing it, keep it up. Like the fact that we can have, like, if you look at like a Grandmaster meta right now, the fact that Symmetra can be like halfway decent in Grandmaster and people aren't literally losing their minds. Imagine you teleported back to 2017 and said Symmetra's going to have a 55% win rate in Grandmaster. People would lose their minds. But that Symmetra does not resemble this Symmetra. And the same thing goes with Pharah, and so on. So I guess my point is that, like, using the statistics, Shami should educate. Mei is way underperforming. Can we buff aspects of her kit that make her a lot more interesting and more fun to play? And I don't necessarily mean more complicated. I don't necessarily mean everything has to have this complex skill ceiling. I'm not trying to get too off tangent here, but it was like the last point of disagreement with me and Questron is Questron was like, well, isn't that just making the game too hard? No, hard is subjective. People confuse the floor of characters with how difficult they conflate difficulty with complexity. Let me start with that. Okay, the difficulty with complexity. Tracer is, let me kind of clarify what I mean. Tracer is not a complex character. Tracer is not a complex character. Neither is Winston. Neither is Genji. Neither, interestingly enough, is really Lucio. She's just hard. And that's good, which means that a new player can look at the character, have a general vibe of how they should play, and then be rewarded for applying themselves to it. I agree with the sentiment that you want to avoid complicated characters because they can be daunting for new players to play, but I don't think we need to be scared of like difficult characters. Yeah, Moira's complex. I mean, and Moira is probably just as complex as half the other characters. Right, exactly. And the last thing I'll say on this front is that we've had this conversation before, but skill is always relative. So if a character is too hard to play, then you're not going to be playing versus players better than you for long. You're going to end up right at the rank that you deserve. The argument that there's certain characters that are too hard for the game, that's an argument that really only applies to games without skill-based matchmaking. It doesn't make sense for that to be a real argument in a skill-based matchmaking game. It just shows that you don't understand how the game works. I mean, freaking Rivals has, on average, I think, more complicated characters than Overwatch. I think almost objectively, Rivals characters are, without exception, more complicated than Overwatch characters on average. But they're all easier. Yeah, so... Okay, all words, many words being said. Gee, willikers. That was a lot. Sorry, guys. Let's look at Asia. Did we look at Grandmaster? I think we did, no? Yeah, we did. Yeah, so Grandmaster, let's look at Grandmaster Asia, or just Asia in general right now. Sem, Genji, Venture, Tracer, Pharah. Yeah. There's no real surprises here. Let's just go ahead and jump ahead to all tiers. Asia. Yeah, and I guess my last point here, and this just I want to reemphasize this with this, is I'm not advocating for every character to get a complete rework from the ground up to be like infinitely harder, like Tracer level difficulty. I am perfectly happy if they leave Pharah in the state that she is for the rest of time. I'm fine with that. I'm fine if they leave Brig in her state. I'm fine if they leave Lucio in his state. I'm fine if they leave, honestly, Echo is not great, but sure, whatever, it's fine. Like, there's a lot of characters that are just fine as they are, you know? They're like, you know, it's fine. So, okay, yeah, Asia, Symmetra's crazy, Ashe is insane, Venture's insane. There's nothing really surprising here. Sombra's pretty small sample size, but doing relatively well. Sombra is also historically a pretty well-performing DPS. Genji's definitely a lot weaker. Actually, that's not true. I actually am not so sure if Genji's a lot weaker. I'm just making stuff up now. What? How is he stronger? Context, maybe? Maybe his matchup versus Ashe? Wow, that's weird. I mean, it is a smaller sample size because it is Grandmaster. So there is going to be a little bit more variance here, but he has a relatively high pick rate. Weird. 51.1. I mean... Oh, I'm... it was all ranks, my bad. All right, there we go. Whee! There it is. There's my boy. It wasn't Grandmaster, it was all tiers. My bad. All right, that we found him. 46%. 3% drop. Oh my gosh. Yeah, he's dumpster fire in Asia. So we took a very big hit. Took a very, very big hit. Yeah. They both Genji and Tracer have been like absolutely crushed. Genji definitely deserves it a little bit more because his pick rates were so much higher, and definitely think was outperforming Tracer in most ranks. But this is like this is why the importance of like knowing what to buff and nerf. So with Genji, you needed to nerf the easier aspects of his kit, and for Tracer, you needed to nerf the harder aspects of her kit. You know, because they were like Genji went way down in higher ranks, Tracer went way up. You know, and they just kind of sledgehammered both, and so they both just did a lot worse without really kind of addressing their weak points or their strong points. You know, like Genji's now absolutely unplayable in higher ranks, despite not being particularly strong in higher ranks prior to that. And Tracer is actually still okay in higher ranks, but she's almost completely unplayable in lower ranks. Now, this is obviously in Asia where Genji was always a little bit weaker to start with. So do keep that in mind. So I want to clarify here. This was Genji's win rate in America, 50.2 prior to the patch. And then if we compare 46.1 and then go here, 47, right? He's a full percentage point higher, but I mean, he's still in the dumpster. Still in the dumpster, so, And if you were doing your diligence, we'd also compare European meta as well, which I think can be a little bit more flyer meta as well, but it depends. Stuff is interesting, man. I hope this definitely is good stuff if you take the time to really digest it and think about it, because it will help you to understand things a little bit more given context, and we're still really objectively doing only a surface level doing it, but and I hope that you guys use this information with a little bit of humility as well, and it's definitely a challenge for me as well. But just because that you don't want Dunning-Kruger effect or whatever it is, where you're like somewhat educated on a topic and you like massively overestimate your understanding of things. This is just, so be cautious with what you guys do with this information. Be cautious. It's definitely worth, your opinion should be educated from this, but there's some nuance here, and we don't fully understand everything. So if nothing else, this just raises some questions. So this is OWTIC, OWTIC. I'll copy it in Twitch chat, but it's owtix.gg. That's why I choose to never become educated. That's the real strat. You're never going to know everything, so why know anything? How are Diva win rates? Diva skyrocketed, especially in higher ranks. Unsurprisingly. The way I look at these statistics is I try to predict what they're going to do before they do it, which sounds weird. You should think, you should just like let the statistics tell you what you should think. But the reason I do that is that I prevent myself from trying to back explain the numbers, because the numbers are going to be missing nuance, right? So when I look at the Diva win rate skyrocketing, I wouldn't go, let's just see what happens. And, Diva skyrocketed. Wow, that makes a lot of sense, right? Instead, I'd go, well, Diva win rate went up by a lot, so it should go up, I feel like. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that would affect Diva win rate. Sorry, I got a minor nerf, but I still think she's going to be meta. So I think that maybe Diva win rate could go up by more. Let's go look and see. And then I adjust my opinions or think about things. Like basically, you just want to be thinking critically before you look at the numbers and after you look at the numbers. You don't just want to turn your brain off. So, okay, support. This is all tiers. This is America. Wu Yang still is doing well. Lucio Zen doing well. Definitely going to see more like Zen Mercy in America, because it's a bit of a more poke hit scan, less dive focused, even with the state of hit scan right now. So, yeah. You jump to Grandmaster. Idiari, Lucio, Wu Yang, same kind of crap. I love just how high Kiriko's pick rate is and how bad she is. The reason why Kiriko is picked really often in higher ranks is that she's really good at the professional meta, which I did a discussion on that Saturday. TLDR is that Suzu's really good for disengaging, pushing and pulling, which doesn't happen even in high-level ranked. But I will tell you right now that high-ranked players are really stupid when it comes to Kiriko. They vastly overstate her power objectively, and they have continued to do so for some time. So, yeah, so let's take a quick look here at Asia as well. Well, no, we'll go ahead and jump to America. We'll do all tiers. America, Weiyang, Lucio, Zen. These are very similar. Very, very similar. Shockingly similar. Like, insanely similar. So Juno went up by a teeny tiny bit with that movement buff, maybe. Brigitte definitely is probably the biggest winner with that full half a second reduction on packs. Kiriko definitely got a pretty big slap on the wrist, so her win rate went down a bit by the ult nerf. But not a lot has changed. Brig has gone up. A couple of things have shifted around a tiny bit. Kiriko's gone down. Pros don't overestimate Kiriko, no. Grandmaster players overestimate Kiriko. Do you understand the difference there? Because the things that Kiriko is utilized in professional play is not as oftenly used and ranked. And I talk about that at great detail on Saturday. And again, if you want the TLDR, it's because Suzu is incredibly strong at push-pull, being able to disengage or kite or push in with ultimates or denying ultimates at the highest level of coordination and communication that is not there in even champion ranked games. Survivability is vastly overstated, and yes. So yeah, not much change with America. And most of these feel predictable given the just reading the patch notes. Brigitte go up. I think also Brigitte's matchups versus Diva goes up. So Diva being stronger is definitely helpful for Brigitte, but relatively small sample size. If we look at GM Champion, Mercy's just hilariously good. I have no explanation for that. Don't know if that's just a contextual thing, but Mercy is really strong. Not a massive sample size, but she's good. Kyra, thank you for the sub. I do think that Mercy's perks are okay. I think that the meta, I have no idea. I honestly just don't know. Ashe buff for sure, but I don't think that that's enough to justify this alone in a vacuum. But I do think that Ashe meta definitely has an impact on that. Because EDR is also doing halfway decent, and Weiyang Lucio is still doing decent. Lifeweaver, very small sample size, so we'll ignore that for right now. But obviously he did receive some buffs. Actually, that's worth looking at here. We'll look at all tiers Lifeweaver because he did receive some buffs, remind me, chat. But Kiriko's in the dumpster. 47.1%, which is really bad in Grandmaster Champion because you're expected to have slightly higher win percentages. And surprisingly, Juno not that much stronger either. Relatively small sample size. In fact, she feels a bit worse. So we will have to wait and see on that one. Zen's a bit weaker as well, so keep an eye on that one. But again, smaller sample size, so we'll see. Yeah. I mean, Kiriko requires responsibility to be able to play it well. That's it. So, yeah, Ana Juno only got a tiny little buff, so keep that in mind. But yeah, let's look at Weaver really fast. So Weaver went from 47 he is 47.3, but he went from, a whole percentage up. And it's a big enough of a sample size considering it's all tiers, right? Yeah, okay, cool. So he's better for sure. So Brig better, Weaver better, Juno slightly better, probably. Kiriko slightly worse. Yep. And then we'll take a quick look at Asia here, which is going to have a heavy Ana bias. Just, again, given the context of dive. Ana's way, way higher. Zen, Weiyang, Kiriko is okay-ish. Weaver's really bad. Bap's really bad, and so on. Mercy also in the dumpster. And you guys want to see something really funny here. Look at how bad Mercy is in Grandmaster. 40.7% in Asia. In GM. 40.7%. Kiriko, 52%. Decent. Meta contextually feels better. Maybe the takeaway here is that it's way better to play Kiriko with a much more dive-friendly thing, so your off-angling and your survivability and so on just feels more impactful. There's a significant dive impact, and that you're seeing that with both the Ana and Kiriko's win rate being as high as it was. Lifeweaver Mercy in the trash. 31% for Lifeweaver. Now, post-buff, this is all tiers. All tiers, all tiers, all tiers. Wuyong's good. Zen is okay. Ana, still solid. So let's go ahead and pivot this over to all tiers so we can kind of tab back between these things here. Wuyong, Zen, Ana, relatively similar, I think, with what we're looking at here. Kiriko, noticeably worse. Or no, she's like the exact same. Yeah, the exact same. Interesting. Wow, the exact same? Really? Now that's interesting to me because she's definitely worse. So there's something that within the meta, maybe it's the diva side of things that's kept her in. No idea. No idea. Brigitte slightly stronger, actually more than slightly stronger, noticeably stronger. Diva meta plus the pack buff. Mercy goes from being 47.9 to 48. Whee! And Lifeweaver goes from being 43.1 to 44.2. Whee! All right. It's crazy, man, right? How is Mercy so bad, man? It's meta. Meta, man. It's the way things go. Like, right? Like, you have to look at things within context. And this is why it can be so difficult to balance these things. Oh, I just saw a 22 something, I think. All right, let's look at the Grandmaster in Asia. Wuyong Juno. Small, very small sample size, so we won't read too much into that, but feels like maybe a bit stronger. Kiriko, 51.5. Wow. So she's definitely worse. A little bit worse, but competing okay. Is it a skill issue or is it a meta issue? Do Western players vastly overestimate Kiriko's utility and value in non-dive compositions? Let's frame it that way. Is it a skill issue? Or let me say it again. Do Western players vastly overestimate Kiriko's utility and pressure output in non-dive compositions, considering the pick rates of characters like Tracer and Winston in comparison to Western characters? This is post-nerf. I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is yes if you blindfolded me before I looked at these win rates. But yeah, Ana, she's fine. She's about the same. Brigitte, a bit better. I think Brigitte, the higher ranked players definitely recognize her. The diva, I mean, she's a lot better, right? Mercy, 43.1%. Lifeweaver, 22.8 post buff. Very small sample size, but yeah. Regional. Yeah, we haven't even looked at console numbers, Rag, right? I mean, I can look at console numbers really fast if you want, but yeah, I mean, console stuff with like Zimming. I mean, Zimming creates its own subculture within itself to the point where it's honestly not even worth looking at console high rank stuff. So, yeah. Now, I want to be very clear. I don't think they're that bad, but people are much more willing to throw ranked games. So, yeah, console. I care about console. I don't care about high rank console. Let me kind of clarify what I mean. Because high rank console is filled with cheaters. So, yeah. And by the way, there's like an elephant in the room that we haven't really talked about, which we mentioned briefly, but I guess I want to talk about it really fast here. Lucio is consistently, quote unquote, overperforming. I mean, he's not as strong right now. But he's been like in the top 4 or 5, or if not top 3 or 2 or even 1 for a long time. I just want you guys to remember that when we talk about like why certain characters should be allowed. 61.1. 55.5. Aren't Zimmers in their own pool right now? I mean, they should be, but we all know how that goes. And we all know who the top tank is going to be, right? Swatchper, think of this up. Should be Diva, right? Or Malga. Dude, freaking Malga's played because of Zimming. It's crazy. It's not Diva? Oh, I'm looking in Asia. I'm stupid. There it is. There's my girl. There's my girl. I guess you should probably go back and look at the other tiers now. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous, man. Ashe, Soldier, freaking Soldier, dude. Soldier. EVRA, BAP, top 2, of course. Crazy. Diva Malga with a 56.2% win rate. Wait, let's just check out the PC players are doing with that. Wait, where'd Malga go? That's crazy, man. Pharah's performing well for that environment. I mean, well, if you consider the sample size, I think I'm hesitant to agree with you. But yeah, globally, She's probably okay because she still has the thing of where people have a hard time aiming. But even then, obviously, it's not necessarily as true. I mean, look at Sombra, right? She's a lot harder in console to play versus because it's a lot harder to turn around, you know? So, yeah. Yeah, so this is... And so then... okay, so this is why having public statistics, I feel like, is great. Because this gives us so much more context about why certain things happen. The Tracer nerfs makes a whole lot more sense when you see her pick rate and win rate in Asia, you know? And why Winston hasn't gotten any significant buffs despite not being that great in America when you look at Asia, right? You know? Not saying that you have to, this is why it's very complicated. Why has Orisa not received any buffs? Because you got to think about the context of when and where she's being picked, right? Right. And so usually when I disagree with buffs and nerfs, more often than not, it's actually not whether the character deserved a buff or nerf. And I challenge you guys to do the same with your criticism. It's more along the lines of what was buffed or nerfed in terms of how it will affect their performance in high ranks and low ranks, and the overall health, which I know is much more subjective, but health of the character, skill expression, counterplay, and so on of the character. That to me is the real context. That's the real sauce right there. Yes, Rag. Trace is hard to deal with because you can't 180 as fast. That is correct. You have to look at design. You have to look at skill floor. You have to look at the quantity of being played. You have to look at the meta. Like, for example, when I look at Reinhardt, is Reinhardt wildly overtuned? No, don't think so. I think he's overperforming because of his shield in lower ranks. But remember, when you start to see inflated numbers like this almost always screams that something in the bottom stinks. You understand what I'm saying? Something died and fertilized Ryan's growth. Okay. And you look down, you're like, oh, there it is. 9.1%, 48. 11%, 43.6. 7%, 46.3. They died so that Reinhardt can live. If these were all like 48, 47, 49, and they were like 3%, 4%, 5% pick rates, but they're all dying so Ryan can win. Right? It's a weird thing, the way to think about it, but that's exactly what you see. So when you see these crazy win rates, right? Like, wow, like how is this possible? Then there's something stinks. 53.4, what the frick? Like, what are the 36.2 pick rate with 47, 26 or 7 with 46.7. What the, right? That's what we're dealing with, right? These guys something stinks, right? Now, I'm not saying that this is always deserved, but this is why I'm always for design discussions, because it sucks that we have to look at these characters as necessary evils in the dumpster that they deserve, you know? I don't like that, you know? And it's also really worth analyzing, why are these characters still perceived as useful even when they're not? Now, I know the argument, people just like playing them, right? Whether they're useful or not. I believe that argument for characters like Kiriko, characters like, I don't know, characters like maybe Sojourn or, Bastion or something, maybe. Not even Bastion. But I believe if you look in the bottom of the win rate characters, you're going to find characters that people often swap to because they feel like they have to, not because they want to. I don't think Moira is a very popular character for people that want to enjoy Moira's gameplay loop. I'm not saying they aren't out there. I actually think she's not the most unpopular character by a long shot. But a large portion of people that are picking her are because they feel like they probably need to. Yeah. I think there are more Moira mains than there are Bastion mains, for example. But yet, if we look at Bastion, 12.7% is a lot, guys. Nobody freaking rolls out on Bastion. You know? Nobody freaking rolls out on Bastion. Nobody freaking rolls out on Orisa. I'm speaking facetiously, but with more than a grain of truth. You guys know this. This is the case. You guys know it. So it's worth analyzing from a designer perspective. Why do people make those swaps? What about our culture has led to this? And don't just say, oh, those characters were overtuned back in the day, so they're still perceived as solutions. But a lot of it is just because they just feel like you're having impact. Like, it's satisfying to keep shooting with Orisa, you know? It's satisfying to be survivable relatively as Moira. And so I think you need to be really careful when you have hero designs that are really good at surviving but not really good at providing value, or really good at just AFK shooting the tank, because that is not enough, even in bronze. This is Bastion's win rate in bronze. Second lowest in the game. This is Moira's win rate. Second lowest. Third lowest. Orisa's win rate, or at bronze, 44.5. It is hard to discern because you don't know who played, but it is something that you can conjecture. And honestly, if you dig deep enough, you probably could figure it out too. It's probably pretty easy to track what the pick percentage of characters on rollout versus swap. People usually play the character they want to play at the start. Usually. So, Tetris often does. Well, Tetris is not a human, so do with that information as you will. And then obviously not just the character that they're choosing, but also the gameplay loop that the person is encouraged to do. Is it intuitive to do the right thing? It's why I'm very critical of Mei's design, because I like a lot of aspects of Mei's design, but I think that the gameplay loop to play her well is unintuitive, right? Certainly with some of the Overwatch 1 baggage. You know what I'm saying? Same thing probably goes with Kiriko and Orisa and so on. You want what's healthy for the character, or the correct way to play, to be more intuitive. That's why Tracer is such a great design, is because if you pick up the character. I remember the first time I played Tracer, I distinctly remember it was on Oasis. I was playing on my buddy's PC, trying on Overwatch for like the first time. It might have been my third game or fourth game ever playing Overwatch. And he said, don't play Tracer, she's too hard. And I was like, oh, I'm going to try it. And I hated it. I had a horrible time. I just died instantly. But I immediately knew what I was supposed to do. I mean, the freaking name. You know what you're supposed to do.
Brig isn't super duper intuitive, at least when it comes to dive either.
True. Brig is also not super intuitive. That's right. I think that's why Brigitte is generally a slightly underperforming character as well. But I'm not saying that has to be a hard rule, that every character has to visually and physically feel perfectly how they're supposed to be being played. Because I do think that's probably very hard to do, especially for characters that have so much Overwatch 1 baggage that were very bad designs in Overwatch 1. But I do think that if you look at outliers, it's not an accident that the characters that are the most disconnect between their actual performance versus how they feel are the characters that have a lot of design problems. So there has to be like Orisa. Do we need to dumpster Orisa's kit? No, I don't think so. I think Javelin's fine. Javelin spin's got potential, whatever. But we should probably make the Orisa players feel more fragile when they're getting shot from range. We should encourage them to play cover more, or something, because those things don't feel as bad as they really are. I don't know. It's a big cultural question of even the game's onboarding tutorial system. Do people understand the value of space? Do they understand that this is controlling angles? And in many ways, Overwatch is much more of a shooter than it is a hero-based team shooter than it was before. At least in the 5v5 format. And I just don't know how the game communicates that as well. Whether you like that versus the 6v6 aspect, that's something more subjective. But what is not subjective is that understanding is not always carried over quickly. And I don't think you have to blame the developers for everything. I think the player base has to take responsibility, but at some point it is part of the system to train the player base to do the right thing, even if they can't always do it perfectly. So Captain Ricard, thank you for the sub. Wow. That was a lot of yapping. Any questions here? This was way more in depth than our last one. Let me turn on the light really fast. Do you think Champ should have a 40% plus pick rate, or is that a sign that something's a mess? Champion is such a small... Okay, so this is the interesting thing about getting to the higher ranks as well. Okay, so you want to add a little extra nuance in there because that's what you guys are here for. The danger with Champion, and even to a lesser extent Grandmaster, is that it becomes inbred. So there are metas and cultures that evolve because of people that watch and learn pro meta. and they often confirm their own biases. Let me give you an example of that. I think if you look at Kiriko's performance in Grandmaster and Champion, and we'll look at Europe for this one as well. So Kiriko in the dumpster, you look at Europe as well. Kiriko in the dumpster. I think that is a cultural interpretation problem. I actually think that they are encouraging themselves to do stupid things because they think that the character is OP. It's OWCS brain rot, where the character is unironically like probably very, very good in scrims and certain metas, as we talked about on Saturday with the push-pull and Suzu and Kitsune, but that they have convinced themselves that she's better than she is in ranked, and she just isn't. She just isn't good. I mean, look at that 50% pick rate, and she's in the bottom 4. You have just as much chance of winning the game picking, but you have a better chance picking Mercy in Europe than you do. Maybe I misunderstood the question. Do you think champs have a 50% pick rate, or is that a sign that something's a mess? Yeah, okay, yeah. So the reason what I'm saying is saying that like a character, like certain characters at pick rates will explode in higher, more niche ranks because everybody knows each other. Mostly, they all watch the pro play and they're all convinced that certain characters are really good and certain characters are not really good, even if that's objectively not true. And that I think the smaller the sample size of players, the more vulnerable they are to that. Like, hey, Shirthai, how are you? So, I mean, you look at it. Why are all the pro players, the high-ranked players, not picking EDRE? I mean, that's a pretty good performance in a relatively decent sample size. Why are we not playing more Juno? Right? Why is Lusu not 30% pick rate instead of 21.4? Right? Why are we not always playing Mercy or EDRE? Like, freaking EDRE is doing still decent, and she has a 5% pick rate. Now, do people just not enjoy playing that? Maybe, but you also have to remember that higher ranked players should be more focused on what's actually meta and what's not. I mean, look at this, 56.6% win rate, and she's got a 40%, or pick rate, and she's got a 47% win rate. Well, you guys can't see that. Okay, there you go. What? I mean, you have to tell me that means that you should look at 40% pick rate characters in Champion, because again, those are going to be the streamers yapping away, telling everybody what to think, right? However, my point being is I'm exposing many of these high-ranked players for bringing really bad opinions into ranked and creating their own problems. Like, I'm telling you right now, Zen is as good as Kiriko in Champion, objectively. Now, obviously, that's not true. This is a relatively small sample size. It's probably, if people stop picking Kiriko in inappropriate situations, she'd probably be closer to 50%. So people are actually deflating her win rate, probably forcing her in a lot of situations. But I'm saying that it is an inbred community. It is an inbred community. They've convinced themselves of something that's not actually true. We can actually keep looking at that here. You guys ready for this? GM America pick rate. Ready for this? Sojourn. 22.2, 45.8. Sojourn's OP, guys, trust me. Cassidy, 22%, 45.7. Cassidy's OP. No, maybe in scrims. Maybe the push-pull of Sojourn Cassidy. Again, we talked about push-pull, right? These characters do well in scrims because double slide's great. Roll Hinder is really good, right? But they're not ranked. Not as much as rank. You should shut up and play your Ashe. Play your Sem. Play your Echo. Play your Venture Farah. Play your Soldiers. Right? Right? Let's go to Europe. Same crap, right? Tracers, Sojourn. Why are we still picking Genji, guys? Why are we still picking Sojourn? Why are we still picking Cassidy with a 44.2% win rate? You know, let's look at Tank. Why are we picking Orisa in Europe? 46.6. Why are we forcing Winston 50%? Just shut up and play Diva, dude. Shut up and play Zarya. Shut up and play, situationally on the map. Wrecking Ball, Queen. Right? What about America? Why are we still forcing Winston, guys? Trust me, he is not good. Now, the argument here is that, I want to grind the character that I'm playing in scrims because the character is good in scrims with the level of push-pull. We've already talked about that. And that's a good argument. But the irony is that a lot of these players, they don't even scrim, or they legitimately think the character is good and ranked, right? Just not true. Just not true. Now, again, if you play the character because you want to play the character, or you need to play her or him or her in scrims, and sure, there's no argument for that. That's totally fine. But if you're trying to get at the rank 1 or the top, for the vast majority of players, they would just get to a higher rank if they just played either characters that they want to play or characters that are objectively good. So my point being is that like the whole like you can't just look at like, okay, this character has a 40% pick rate, so we have to nerf her. I mean, maybe people are just stupid, man. Maybe people are just stupid. I feel like I contribute a lot in Sojourn though. Is what is the problem? Your impression might be wrong, or maybe you're just good at Sojourn. I mean, there are people that climb Sojourn to champion. You can absolutely climb Sojourn to champion. I'm not saying you shouldn't pick Sojourn. Just that you might be overestimating your impact. Just a little bit. Is this AI generated? Me? Yes. Nobody can possibly be this smart, this handsome, this charismatic, this friendly, this kind, this giving, this patient, and this long-suffering. Yeah, this is why, like, you know, you can't, like, in a lot of the times, too, pick rates are also correlated highly with how just fun the character is. Like, people play Ana even when she's not that good because she's just freaking fun. She's a very popular character in high ranks because she's fun. Tracer, fun. Sojourn, to be honest with you guys, I get the appeal. Sojourn's fun. Cassie, also fun. Ashe, fun. Genji, fun. Fun is subjective, but we'll say popularly considered fun. So people will be more likely to play them even if they're not particularly good. Like, you know, we go to the bottom here. Malga, people just don't find Malga fun, even if he's halfway decent. So, Bertie, thank you for the 3-month sub. So, and that's why people in low ranks and mid ranks play Mercy. People that are likely to play Mercy are less likely to be serious about the game, but she is objectively a very fun character for a lot of players. As much as that pains me to say, it's objectively true. I think a lot of people that play Mercy don't play Mercy because of necessity, because they legitimately enjoy the character loop. You know, so.
Yo, Spillo him on my longest win streak
nice,
ever.
Dude.
12 ranked wins. 77% win rate on Zen and 1 win away from Masters. Suffice to say him hyped.
I don't think it was 12. It might be 10, 9, 10, 11, something like that. That's really good. The real question is, what's your longest lose streak? Mercy's so fun. I knew you'd say that, Miji. I mean, movement-wise, sure, I get it. You know, a lot of people agree. You know? But yeah, I've won 9 or 10 straight for sure. I don't know if I've won more than that, though. 12 is a lot. 20 losses in a row? I think I've lost like 13, 12, 13. And so, like, to me, that's why, like, when we were talking about like design critiques of like Moira, for example, you guys notice I didn't critique Mercy. Not that I think that her Mercy is her design, is perfect. I'm saying that like you have to be much more careful about your redesigns with Mercy than you do with Moira, because more people enjoy playing Mercy just in her state than enjoy playing Moira. You get what I'm saying? So from a design perspective, you need to keep intact with what people enjoy about Mercy, but you can be a lot more flippant and a lot more risky with Moira redesigns because far fewer players enjoy playing Moira in her current state. I know they're out there. It's not that your opinion doesn't matter. It just matters less. From a business perspective, guys, we're being a little cold, but yeah. And you do also have to factor in like how frustrating is the character to play versus, because it is a PvP game, it is your fun does not come for free. It always comes at expense, which is why the rivals aspect of like the rivals strategy I have felt of like it's so broken it doesn't matter anymore. That is totally fine in small doses, but if you're a competitive you play the game a lot, we don't care about balance mindset is really bad. Because it comes at the expense of somebody. Somebody has to suffer for your fun, right? People won't always mind if they get their hype moments if they're a casual player, but you know. They rarely play the other mobile characters. Well, Ajaxon, the difference is that the reason why you guys want to know why Mercy is such an anomaly is because when you're playing Mercy, you're allowed to focus exclusively on the movement and nothing else. There is not a single character in Overwatch that is allowed to only focus on movement. Now, I do agree that that's a bad thing. There should be at least some sort of resource management, if not mechanic involved. I don't think Mercy necessarily needs to be pistoling everybody, but having some sort of resource management, some sort of, you know, MOBA-esque kind of thinking is good and needs to be a part of the character's design moving forward. But the reason why Mercy players like it is because they don't only have to focus on movement. That's it. Yeah, other mobile characters don't like moving Mercy because it's boring. Because once you focus on the movement, you've already done 90% of the character's value. And so people that like playing Mercy kind of like turning their brain off a little bit and just enjoying the flow. You know, they're a vibe enjoyer. It's not saying that they enjoy that they're less or better from a subjective personal standpoint. They just, when they play Overwatch, they're not playing it to be hard sweating. It's their subjective experience. Like a person that's playing Grandmaster Mercy is much more likely to be playing the ceiling of that character than a person that's in Grandmaster playing literally any other character. Because Mercy requires so much fewer multitasking than compared to other characters. You do other things with your brain power, like yell at my teammates? Right. That's why all the better Mercy players, I don't know if you guys know Dreedro, right? Like Dreedro, I coached Dreedro for a little while back, a long time ago. Just a phenomenal Mercy player. And he's a phenomenal main support in a scrimmage environment because that guy could ult track, scout like nobody's business while also moving perfectly with Mercy. And nobody played Mercy. And so Dreedro used every single brain cell that wasn't actively moving and doing every other single skill. Right. And so if you, that's like, you know, that's really good, you know? Yeah. Yep. It's literally just movement, Ajax, and yes. I mean, the really way to think about it is just imagine if you played Wrecking Ball without a weapon. I mean, you could also argue that Wrecking Ball's movement's a lot more complicated than Mercy, and I would agree with that. But imagine you played Lucio without a weapon, right? Like, wow. I mean, that literally just remove the weapon. So think about that. You still have your amp, sure. You have to choose which aura you're playing, sure. You have to move effectively and pocket the right person at the right time. But you were literally removing your weapon, you know? So people like that, you know? People enjoy the vibes from that. You see that in other media as well, not just video games. Sometimes people just kind of like not turning their brain off, but just turning their brain on to a single aspect and not multitasking, you know?